What's up, dudes? Max here with some awesome news for you classic Capcom fans. This is all over the internet right now, and I kind of wanted to throw in my 2 cents and a big hope for what's going to be in the future of what was announced earlier today, and it is official. Resident Evil 2 is being remade by Capcom. This is not a remaster. Some of you guys have been hearing things about remasters in the past. We saw that Resident Evil remake, which was the original Resident Evil remake to the old Resident Evil back in like the 90s, was a full remake. They remade that game. They changed mechanics of it. They added more stuff to the game. They completely overhauled the graphics, and they adjusted small gameplay things to make the game a little bit more accessible and more fun than the original. That was a proper remake. However, what we saw just come out recently of Resident Evil Remake was that essentially it was a remaster. They upgraded the game to 1080p. We were able to play the GameCube version of the game on our modern day consoles, and it was pretty damn good. I loved that game, and I've played through it a couple times now, and it's pretty freaking fantastic. What we're talking about with Resident Evil 2 Remake is to completely redo the game's assets and elements from the original released Resident Evil 2 back in the 90s. This is what they did with the first Resident Evil, which was directed by Shinji Mikami, and this one, or the original Resident Evil 2, was directed by Hideki Kamiya. There's been some really interesting stuff that's been floating around lately where Kamiya has said he wouldn't mind working with Capcom, and he has no bad blood with Capcom outside of like the whole Inafune thing, where Inafune and Capcom are on really bad terms, it feels like. But Kamiya, who was the original director of like Devil May Cry and Resident Evil 2 at Capcom way back in the day, doesn't work for them anymore. He works for Platinum Games, and he has actually said that he would work with them on specific games and titles. And I wouldn't be surprised if he actually came in to help out with some stuff on Resident Evil 2 Remake. Now, RE2 holds a pretty damn good spot in my pantheon of games that I like a whole bunch. In terms of the entire Resident Evil series, my favorite one of all of them is Resident Evil 4, followed up with Resident Evil Remaster Remake, which is the one that came out recently. I thought that game is just so much fun, and it reminds you how good the classic formula, you know, the old classic style of solving puzzle, going through a mansion, everything like that, the fixed camera, I really enjoy that. Even though I like the over-the-shoulder stuff of Resident Evil 4 wasn't as much a horror game, and Resident Evil Remake definitely does feel like a horror game. And really, that's what I want out of Resident Evil 2, the new remake that they're talking about. What type of game is this new Resident Evil 2 gonna be? Is it gonna be an over-the-shoulder with a gun type of game where it's sort of like Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6? Or are we gonna go back to the classic, you know, old Resident Evil style, which is kind of like tank controls, where you get the option for analog controls, static cameras, and it just looks freaking incredible. I do have a funny feeling that right now, and kind of the way that everything's being treated, we're also getting Resident Evil 0 Remaster coming out fairly soon. That game looks extremely damn good. You'd be kind of surprised the difference between the old Resident Evil Remake going to Resident Evil 0, how much better the graphics were back in the day, because those assets actually translate to 1080p shockingly well. And when you play that game in person, it's like, yo, damn. That's actually what I want for Resident Evil 2. I don't want these big 3D worlds and environments. I don't want the city to be fully remastered, you know, within like a giant 3D space. We kind of got something very similar to that in Resident Evil 6, and it was cool, but in my opinion, Resident Evil 2 doesn't need that. It's a game that's designed around having a static camera, having these characters run and do things. I think one of the better things they can do is just increase the mechanics based around that. Similar to what they did with Resident Evil, the original Resident Evil remake, they gave characters these interesting stun items, these sub-items. Let's do cool stuff like that. Let's maybe give Leon the ability to dodge or something along those lines like they did in Resident Evil 3. Take some stuff that's worked in other Resident Evils and implement it into this game, because I don't feel like it needs to be this gigantic, huge, budget, ridiculous Resident Evil 6 game. And admittedly, a lot of people that have been following Resident Evil don't really like the super action-packed post-Resident Evil 5 games. I don't mind RE5, I think the game's actually a lot of fun, but it definitely doesn't feel like a Resident Evil. It's got great characters, it's a lot of fun, like I said, but at the same time, it's like, this is a huge departure from what we remember, and even a bigger departure from something like Resident Evil 4, and Resident Evil 6 is a whole other can of worms. I've already forgotten most of that game, and it did not even come out that long ago, and I played through all the scenarios and campaigns. So I think RE2, as much as it means a lot to me, this is one of the Resident Evils I played the most when I was younger. I played through this game, all of its scenarios, all of its like A and B scenarios with both Leon and Claire on both sides to get the unique sides of the story. All that stuff desperately needs to stay, and I really want them to stick with the static camera, and if they want to, like, kind of lower the budget and the crazy cost of the game, do it just like you did with Remake Remaster. Make those backgrounds 1080p, make them gorgeous, give them a ton of moving elements, actually make them 2D. I have no problem if you make those backgrounds 2D, because you can do some really damn cool stuff with the player characters, the enemies, everything around it. It'll be brilliant if this game is good, guys. I do have faith. I did like Resident Evil Revelations 2. I thought the game was a lot of fun. I wasn't a huge fan of the first Revelations, but it wasn't, like, insanely great. It was a solid 8 out of 10. It was a fun game. I'm glad I played it, but it wasn't exactly scary. There was some tense moments, but I think I'm just kind of tired of Resident Evil being a third-person shooter. I would want to see it return to its roots, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are possibly going to agree with me on this one, but what do you think about Resident Evil 2 being remade from Capcom? It's going to be quite a while until we see anything like this, but I'm fairly sure that with other things that have happened recently, with Resident Evil, Remake Remastered coming out and selling so damn well, Capcom wasn't expecting that, which triggered Resident Evil 0, and then other games that have also been recently talked about that are getting remade, like Final Fantasy VII. There was 2 games in, like, the past 10 years, the decade that we've been looking forward to video games, that a lot of people have been asking for remakes of, and it was Resident Evil 2 and Final Fantasy VII, and I can't freaking believe that I am still alive to actually see them both happen. As always, guys, thanks a ton for watching. My name is Max, and I'll see you next time.